Hello, welcome to Glastonbury. Can I get you anything to drink? No? You're all set? Alright, well, let's continue. Red could not reasonably, normally, have divined the nature of this horrid thought, of this newly born abortion from the broodings of Mr. Trawler's brain. There must have been within him some protoplasmic response to it, created by the germinating poisons of his eight, of which he himself was unconscious. Violence must have called to violence, like deep calling to deep, between what was unconscious in the one and conscious in the other. Once more he glanced furtively, quickly, at the man standing by the table, and this time their eyes met. "'Twas your cleverness what put me in first into me head." Had Mr. Towler uttered these words, or had he thought those words himself? Red felt a peculiar and ghastly unreality stealing over him. The gin bottle looked unreal. The carpet looked unreal. The low wicker chair with its flowered cushions, where he had so recently held Sally on his lap, looked most unreal of all. "What's that you're sighing?" His own words seemed unreal now, as soon as they left his mouth. "A bloated capitalist like him, what to exploit as poor dogs, or to be liquidated." It was Mr. Towler, undoubtedly, who was saying that, and Red recognized his own oratorical expression, liquidated, the meaning of which, for the word had reached him from Bristol, had always puzzled him, though this had not prevented him from using it in his orations. "A hairy stokrat like he be oughter be liquidated," repeated Mr. Towler. And Red's discomfort was augmented by the manner in which the man's mouth dribbled as the words left his throat. "You're drunk, that's what you are. Too drunk to know your own mind. And if I want Hunweilen to disturb this quiet house, liquidated be on top of one of bloody head, I tell ye. Tap one's head till bloody brains be out." Well. It was not the words alone. It was a certain galvanistic twitch that accompanied them in Mr. Towler's hands that made Red begin now to feel sick in the pit of his stomach. He suddenly found himself becoming fascinated by Mr. Towler's hands. As he looked at these hands, he noticed that they were not only short and stubby hands, but this was quite unlike most stubby hands. They were hands that tapered at the fingertips and could bend backwards. How patient, harmless, reassuring most human hands are. But Reg realized now that Mr. Towler's hands were much more disturbing than any expression in the features of his face. In all minds there are abominable thoughts. We are all potential murderers. It's true. But something, some feeling, some motion of the will, some scruple, some principle, intervenes, and we cannot act what we think. But there was a look about Mr. Towler's hands that seemed like the cry of murder in the night, like the underside of bridges, like shrubberies in public parks, like tin-roofed sheds near madhouses, like gasworks beside foul canals, something that unraveled the skein, that broke up the fundamental necessity and substituted a monstrous, terrifying chaos, deep black holes, dangling ropes, desperate dilemma of the indestructible corpse, the horror of the secret held by one alone. Red now began to see those hands of Codfin at the throat of life, at the throat of that life which meant the sweet body of Sally Jones, excuse me, the carved bishop's chair in his mother's kitchen, the liver and bacon in his mother's frying pan, not to speak of his nice new foreman's clothes. It was part of life that there should be persons like Codfin going harmlessly about. Persons that a working man, foreman, could pass by. But that the gentry, like that John Crow, who had the office in the station yard, were bound in honor to treat the drinks. And those hands were now to be raised against life, the life of a living man. Those hands were tools of liquidation. No more liver and bacon, no more bottles of gin, no more girls on laps, when those hands were lifted up. Unreal! That's what this moment was. And unreal in the way that makes a person feel sick. That straggly beard and slobbering mouth were talking of liquidation, or they were thinking of murder. The blood began to leave Red's cheeks. Poor people might be hungry, sick people might be sick, weak people might have to carry burdens, but they were all alive. And even death, when it came in the natural course of things, had a secret inevitable comfortableness about it. You could talk of such death with a girl on your lap, but murder, that was a different thing. I couldn't do it with a knife, mister. The words sank down into the fireplace at which Red was now staring. Red allowed them to sink like 8 black marbles thrown by a wicked child into a particularly red hole. I don't know what that means. I don't get that connection. I don't know what you're talking about, Toller, he whispered in a low voice. But the other went on. "Not with a billet, mister, for I be feared of thy little pop guns." Sharply, after the other 8 marbles, went these 13 simple words, all of them into the same red hole. "One of them iron bars would do to do it with, what his workmen do leave about, up alongside the Wookie." As he spoke, the man made a feeble and fluctuating movement of his whole person towards the table, on which stood the half-empty bottle of gin, a decanter of water, and a plate of gingerbreads. That sounds good. Red, as his eyes followed him, remembered with miserable vividness how Sally and he had played a merry London board school game with those gingerbreads, having a racing match together to see how many they could swallow while the little minute hand in his watch went around the circle. "Toller!" he rapped out. "What in early hell are you talking about?" The individual known as Codfin patted the stopper of the bottle with the palm of one of his hands. Then he threw a long, silent, sidelong glance at Red out of his lidless and lachrymose blue eyes. He said slowly, "Don't ye go and get crusty with thy, mister. I bain't a clever one like you be, but I can look up wondrous long words in dictionary, I can. They do know I well in public library. A person don't have to write no slip of paper for to take dictionary down from shelf." "Toller!" snapped Red again. "What in old Ari's name are you mumbling about?" "Tyrian East be the word you spoke of, so free and strong, when you made thick girt speech about liquidation, mister. And 'twere wondrous to I, when I did see thick some girl word writ down in dictionary. Tyrian East were thick long words, and it do mean a sweet and unsavory killing of he that lives on poor man's sweat." Tyrian East. Is that terrorist? Tyrian East. "Toller!" gasped Red in horrified alarm. "You stove that, Striding now. You stove it, I say. Shut your bleeding mouth and go to hell with your idiocies. People in speeches may curse those bleeding capitalists, but people what like to iron bars are murderers. That's what they are, plain downright murderers. And people who ever hear such things be complexes of murderers. And I tell you, Toller, I won't so much as hear one word more of this from your bleeding mouth. I'll call the missus straight now, see what she says to your bithering idiocies. Yes, I will. I'll call her straight now. He moved, as he spoke, towards the door. But instead of displaying the least alarm at his threat, Mr. Toller, with ghastly sang-froid, began deliberately to pull the cork from the bottle and pour himself out a glass of raw gin. Red's hands was actually on the handle of the door when he turned round and contemplated this outrageous spectacle. His face worked convulsively as he stood there, the mixture of fear and fury in his heart almost choking him. "Put that stuff down!" he spluttered, but instead of opening the door he found himself holding it tight shut with a sort of guilty violence. In a flash he beheld himself on the dock of Taunton, accused of plotting Philip Crow's murder at the hands of this slobbering devil. But Finn Toller coolly and quietly replaced the cork in the bottle. "Thick iron bars be the best thing, then," he repeated. "I thought a man like you be, mister, would say nothing less. I couldn't do it with a knife, not yet with a bullet. One of they good iron bars be the very thing for anyone what feels on his mind. A thee and me does. The sweet savour of tyrannicide. Red glanced past that pockmarked, freckled face, wherein the weak blue eyes were suffused with a watery rheum, and stared miserably at the gingerbread on the table. How foolish people were, he thought, not to enjoy, with a gratitude to fate beyond expression, every minute of respectable, innocent happiness that was not in danger of the jail or the rope. I've often thought that. His moment of supreme misery was brought to an end by the heavenly sound of the front door opening and the voice of the landlord of St. Michael's Inn raised in genial badinage. Never was a tiresome old gentleman's voice more welcome. As Red opened the door, so vivid had been his plunge into crime, condemnation, convicts, clothes, picking oakum, wardens, jailers, chaplains, executioners, blackcaps, drops, and burning lime, that he vowed that he never again in his whole life would be introduced into his speech the word tyrannicide. Oh, that's the word. Tyrannicide. Killing of a tyrant. As Finn Toller sneaked out now, under cover of the lively eulogies of Miss Jones that poured from the lips of the blustering old man, Red felt that never again, either, would he boast of heroic bloodshed to his admiring Sally. He had got such a glimpse into the monstrous as he watched this Adam apple of Mr. Toller's throat jerk up and down while he drank that gin, that he thought, as he submitted to the old gentleman's jokes, "Better listen to such old-time stuff to the end of my days, rather than have the horrible thought in me mouth what I had just then. Horrible tits, T-I-G-H-S-T, tits, the horrible taste, that's what it is, taste in my mouth." Alright, well, that seems like a good spot to end, because that guy is left. He's a good character, though. Anyway, I'll see you next time in Glastonbury. Hopefully this will record so I don't have to do it all over again, because that would really suck. But cheers.